My stepson's reckless prank nearly killed me, so I kicked him out. Now my wife claims I'm heartless and left me for refusing to let him move back in. I 48M have always believed in second chances. I grew up in a humble environment in a small town, raised by a tight-knit extended family who preached forgiveness and empathy as virtues. So when I met my wife nearly 6 years ago, I was more than ready to embrace her teenage son as my own. He was 14 back then, a bit distant at first, but I made it my mission to connect. I brought him along on weekend fishing trips, taught him how to barbecue in the backyard, and took an interest in his hobbies, video games mostly. The goal was simple: show him that I genuinely cared. We moved into a modest but comfortable house, the kind with a broad porch and a yard big enough for a small garden and a grill. My wife settled in nicely, and I tried my best to create a stable environment for her son, my stepson. Over time, he opened up, shared a few laughs, and even confided in me about some issues at school. I thought our relationship was heading in a positive direction. Then came his teenage years, and with them, a shift in attitude. Around 16, my stepson started hanging with a new crowd. He began skipping chores, ignoring curfews, pushing boundaries. Typical teenage rebellion, I told myself. My wife seemed worried at first, but she tended to look the other way when it came to real discipline. She'd say, "He'll grow out of it," while I felt uneasy about the disrespect creeping into his tone. One evening, he refused to speak to me for hours after I told him to help clean the garage. He stormed upstairs, slammed his door, and blasted music. My wife shrugged, telling me not to stress, but a knot formed in my stomach. If we didn't address the disrespect now, it might escalate. And I was right. We started having petty conflicts, missing money from my wallet, he swore it wasn't him, strange phone calls at odd hours, friend of his lingering in our driveway late at night. My wife insisted he just had wild teenage friends. I tried stricter rules: no friends over without an adult home, no borrowing money unless we agreed on a plan, but every attempt to set a boundary turned into an argument. He discovered an interest in prank videos online. He'd watch them by the hour, stage stunts, practical jokes, some harmless, others borderline reckless. When he was 17, he started pulling pranks on me and my wife, things like plastic wrapping the toilet bowl or rigging the sink sprayer. Childish, sure, but mostly harmless. We confronted him, telling him that not everyone enjoys these jokes. He'd smirk, claiming we were too uptight, then share the footage on social media for his friends to see. It made me uneasy, but I told myself it was a phase. But the so-called joke, that changed everything, happened just after his 18th birthday. One winter afternoon, I came home exhausted from a long shift at my job. My work is physically demanding, so I usually crash on the couch first thing. My stepson, apparently bored, decided to set up a viral-level prank. He rigged a heavy piece of furniture in the living room, some weird contraption so that when I sat on the couch, a closet shelf that held old dumbbells would collapse. Except it wasn't measured or tested carefully. He wanted a dramatic crash for his camera, I guess. I walked in, gave my wife a quick hello, and plopped down on the couch. The next thing I knew, I heard a horrifying creak above me and glimpsed heavy weights tumbling off a makeshift shelf. I barely had time to react. One of them slammed inches from my head, another clipping my shoulder. The shelf itself came down in a violent cascade of wood and metal. I remember a searing pain in my shoulder, my vision swimming. My wife rushed in, screaming. My stepson appeared in the hallway, cell phone in hand, looking both panicked and oddly excited, like he realized it might be more serious than he intended, but also found the chaos thrilling. I was dazed, struggling to breathe properly. Paramedics arrived because my wife dialed 911 the moment she saw the blood soaking my shirt. At the hospital, I learned how dangerously close I'd come to a severe head or spinal injury. If that weight had landed a few inches differently, I might not be alive. My stepson's prank nearly ended my life. In that moment, all the fatherly patience I'd mustered over the years shriveled. Doctors kept me for observation. Meanwhile, my stepson admitted to rigging the shelf but insisted it was just a joke that went wrong. My wife was torn between comforting me in the hospital and dealing with her son's meltdown. The authorities asked questions about whether I wanted to press charges. I felt shattered, betrayed, and terrified at what might happen next. In the hospital bed, my shoulder wrapped in gauze, I wrestled with a swirl of emotions: fear, anger, and a profound sense of disappointment. I tried so hard to be a supportive stepfather, and all it took was one reckless stunt for me to see that maybe I'd been too lenient. My wife hovered by my bedside, tears in her eyes. She kept murmuring, "He didn't mean it, and he's just a kid." But there was nothing childish about that near-fatal crash. A detective stopped by to ask for a statement. They told me that if I wanted to pursue legal action, I could potentially file charges for reckless endangerment. My stepson was 18, legally an adult. I felt sick. On one hand, pressing charges on someone I tried to help raise seemed unimaginable. On the other, he nearly killed me with a contraption he set up purely for online clout. I decided to hold off on a decision about pressing charges. I wanted to talk things through with my wife after I got discharged. But one thing was clear. I didn't feel safe with him in the house. A twisted piece of me worried that if he was capable of such a deadly prank, what else might happen if he got angrier? My wife pleaded with me to understand. She said he's immature. He didn't realize how dangerous it was. She insisted that with proper counseling or therapy, he'd improve. But my trust was shattered. We had a huge argument in the hospital room, culminating in me telling her I don't want him under our roof until we figure out how to guarantee my safety. She grew silent, tears streaming, torn between loyalty to her son and fear for my well-being. I was discharged a couple days later with a sling on my arm, bruises across my back, and a swirl of instructions from the doctor. When my wife and I walked into the house, it felt eerie. The living room was still in disarray, broken shelf, scattered weights, fragments of wood. My wife had been so preoccupied at the hospital that she hadn't had time to clean up everything. The sight of the mess made my stomach churn. I told my wife we needed a serious conversation. My stepson was in his room, apparently refusing to come out. My wife gently knocked on his door, telling him to face me and apologize. He emerged after a few minutes, his shoulders hunched, eyes on the floor. But instead of genuine remorse, the apology felt hollow. "I'm sorry you got hurt," he said in a flat tone. "I thought it would just scare you." He glanced at his phone as if bored by the whole situation. My wife tried coaxing him to explain, and he mumbled about wanting a viral video that he never expected the old shelf to collapse so violently. That's all he had to say. No mention of how I spent nights in the hospital or the fact that a few inches difference could have caused a fatal blow. I told him point blank, "You almost killed me. That is not a minor prank." His face twitched, but he didn't respond. My wife tried to defend him again. "He's just not good at expressing himself," she said, as if that would fix anything. An argument broke out. I said that if he didn't leave, I would, because I couldn't trust living under the same roof with someone who saw near-lethal harm as a joke. The next day, my stepson packed a bag. My wife arranged for him to stay temporarily with a family friend. He seemed indifferent, rolling his eyes and muttering that everyone was overreacting. It stung to see how little guilt he displayed. I was left with an aching shoulder, a battered living room, and a broken sense of peace in my own home. Over the following months, tension between me and my wife simmered. She visited her son often, while I focused on physical therapy and emotional recovery. We tiptoed around the question of whether he'd come back. My stance remained firm, not unless real change happened, an apology, therapy, some sign of accountability. But she kept defending him, telling me I should understand teenage impulsiveness. Except he wasn't a child anymore. He was old enough to know better. I also got wind that my stepson was telling friends and distant relatives that I was an overly strict stepdad who kicked him out for a small prank. His social media portrayed me as the villain. A few outraged family members called or messaged me, demanding I let him come home. They insisted he'd learned his lesson. But from what I saw, he was partying, posting jokes online, and barely acknowledging how close he came to causing a tragedy. In the meantime, I received a call from the detective, asking if I'd made a decision on pressing charges. I hesitated, torn between fear and guilt. Ultimately, I decided to drop the idea. I told the detective I'd handle it within the family. I didn't want to see him end up with a criminal record, even though my anger flared every time my shoulder ached or I saw the dent in the wall. Maybe that was too lenient, but I still had a shred of hope that he'd grow remorseful. Summer rolled in, and I was slowly regaining mobility in my arm. The tension in my marriage, however, only deepened. My wife kept pressuring me to let her son move back. She'd say, "He's struggling out there, crashing on couches. He needs stability." I argued that stability required trust, and trust was broken the night he nearly ended my life. She'd respond with tears, calling me heartless. We'd reconcile briefly, then the cycle repeated. I started noticing her picking fights over trivial matters, laundry not folded, groceries not restocked. Deep down, I knew these spats were proxies for the real issue, her guilt about her son. We tried counseling, but every session turned into her defending him and me explaining that accountability mattered. The counselor gently suggested a middle ground, like a phased approach where he'd demonstrate real contrition. But I doubted that my stepson would play along. He hadn't shown an ounce of sincerity so far. One afternoon, I came home from running errands to find my stepson sitting on our couch, phone in hand. My wife sheepishly admitted she invited him over to talk. I stiffened. He looked up at me, barely concealing his annoyance. My wife ushered us into the kitchen, hoping for a group discussion. The gist of her son's stance. He wanted back in because living at a family friend's place was lame, and he missed having his own room. No mention of regret or wanting to fix our relationship. Just pure entitlement. He said, "You don't need to be so dramatic. It was a prank gone wrong, and you didn't even die." That cut through me like a blade. My wife tried to hush him, but I'd heard enough. I told him calmly, "You almost killed me. I can't just pretend that didn't happen. If you think I'm going to welcome you back without any accountability or genuine apology, you're mistaken." His mouth curled in scorn. "Whatever. This is stupid. Mom, can we go?" My wife's face filled with mortification as she followed him out, leaving me alone in the house we once shared. Later that evening, she returned, tears in her eyes, blaming me for not giving him a chance. I reminded her that chances don't come without change. He's 18, not 12. He doesn't even say sorry beyond that one forced line in the living room. I need more than that. She shook her head, calling me stubborn. Deep down, I felt a mixture of hurt and betrayal. I'd spent years trying to build a family with them. Now it felt like my wife was siding with her son's reckless choices instead of acknowledging the trauma he caused. A few days later, my stepson attempted another stunt, this time of the manipulative sort. He posted on social media how his stepdad hates him and that he's practically homeless. Some extended family members, including my wife's relatives, lashed out at me online. They bombarded me with messages about how a kid needs his home. My father, who'd always been old school, told me on the phone, "You have a right to protect yourself. Don't give in to pressure." I appreciated his support. Meanwhile, my wife's side was calling me cruel, ignoring the fact that her son's actions were borderline lethal. A confrontation was brewing. My wife told me her son had found a part-time job but was going to lose it if he couldn't get stable housing soon. She pleaded that we show him mercy. I responded, "Mercy isn't the problem. He still doesn't grasp the severity of what he did." She insisted he'd matured. I asked, "Where's the sign of that? Has he apologized personally, offered to pay for the damages, or sought counseling? Has he asked about my health?" No, he'd done none of those things. We argued until midnight. She tried to guilt-trip me, referencing how I'd always preached forgiveness. I reminded her forgiveness can happen, but trust and living arrangements are a different matter. "He can't waltz in like nothing happened," I said. "He almost killed me. He needs to earn my trust back." She called me petty, telling me I was turning my back on the family. That stung, but I held my ground. A couple more weeks passed. My stepson texted me once, out of the blue. "I know you think I'm a monster, but I just want my room back. I'll keep to myself. Will that make you happy?" The wording felt manipulative. No mention of understanding or regret, just claiming I saw him as a monster. I replied, "You want me to open my doors? Show me you've changed." He never answered. Instead, he told my wife I was harassing him with demands. Things took a turn when I heard a rumor from a friend that my stepson was telling people he planned to force his way back in, maybe teach me a lesson. I wasn't sure if it was idle talk, but I was alarmed enough to consider changing the locks. Under the law, it was my property. I inherited it years before I married. My wife tried to brush off the rumor as just inventing, but it raised my guard. I also started exploring legal advice. A family lawyer told me that since he's 18, not on the property deed or any lease, I have the right to refuse him entry. If he tried to move in without my permission, That could be trespassing. My wife was furious when she discovered I'd spoken to a lawyer, accusing me of tearing the family apart. Yet, she failed to recognize that her son nearly tore me apart, physically. One night, my wife confronted me with an ultimatum. Either let my son come home or I'm staying with him somewhere else. It broke my heart to hear that. I looked at her, pain in my eyes, and said, "He doesn't even admit he did anything wrong. Are we supposed to ignore that he almost killed me?" She burst into tears, accusing me of never loving her son like my own. I reminded her that I tried for years to connect with him, that I gave him second and third chances. This wasn't about love. It was about survival. A few days later, I came home from work to find my wife gone, along with several of her belongings. A note on the kitchen table: "I have to be with my son. If you change your mind, call me." My heart sank. We'd been married 4 years, shared countless moments of laughter and companionship, now undone by her refusal to see the gravity of the situation. She was choosing to be with him, despite him never showing real remorse. Suddenly, relatives on her side ramped up the pressure, calling me an unfeeling monster. They argued that blood is thicker than water, that a parent's love trumps a step-parent's safety concerns. I might have wavered if my stepson had shown genuine contrition, but he seemed more concerned about having a free place to stay than about making amends. At work, the stress took a toll. Coworkers noticed I was distant, and my boss kindly asked if everything was okay. I told them it was a personal matter, but inside, I felt like I was barely holding it together. The loneliness in the house at night was jarring. I missed my wife's presence, yet I also felt safer with my stepson gone. A contradictory swirl of emotions. Then, one late evening, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. On the other end, I heard my stepson, voice trembling, possibly intoxicated or emotional. He started yelling, telling me I'd ruined his life, that I'd turned his mother against him, that he wished I'd just died on that couch. My breath caught in my throat. He ranted about how everything was my fault. He was couch surfing, broke, and hated living out of a suitcase. He ended the call by threatening to get even. I sat there in stunned silence. That threat removed any lingering doubt. I changed the locks first thing the next morning. I also installed a basic security system and let the local police know about the situation, just in case. I wasn't interested in pressing new charges, but I wanted them aware of a possible threat. The officer said I was taking reasonable precautions. As weeks turned into months, my wife and stepson stayed with a relative. She texted me sporadically, asking if I'd reconsider. My stance stayed the same. He was not moving back in until there was real accountability, counseling, an apology, something more than arrogance. And each time, I got nothing but heated accusations in return. My father reminded me not to let guilt manipulate me. He was right. To this day, the incident has shaped my life profoundly. I still feel an ache in my shoulder during cold weather. My wife remains estranged. My stepson, from what I hear, continues telling people I'm overdramatic, that nobody died, so it's not a big deal. Meanwhile, I've discovered a resilience in myself that I didn't know existed. My circle of friends has offered me empathy and understanding. They remind me that I'm not obligated to endanger myself for a reckless individual who shows no remorse, blood relation or not. Sometimes I question if I was too harsh by refusing him entry. But then I remember how real the danger was, how his prank almost led to tragedy, and how he still doesn't care. I reflect on the nights I spent in the hospital, the fear I felt about losing my ability to walk or even my life. That's not something you can dismiss with a shrug and oops, my bad. So now I ask, am I in the wrong for not letting my stepson move back in after he nearly ended my life? I don't think so. Some might label me unforgiving, but I see it as self-preservation. Until he takes responsibility and shows even a glimmer of genuine remorse, I can't gamble with my safety. No amount of pressure from relatives changes the fact that if he had his way, that prank would have turned into a viral video at the cost of my well-being. If that makes me the villain in his narrative, so be it. In the end, I'd rather be guilt-tripped than end up in another hospital bed or worse. That's my final stance. And I can't help but believe anyone who witnessed the aftermath of that prank would understand. If protecting myself means I'm an awful person in his eyes, I can live with that. But at least I can live, period.